Hello, friends. How's it going? So, continuing our Apocrypha analysis, we were in First Esdras chapter 5, looking at the outer court reference notes, marginalia. And one thing I want to show you here is that it says, just picking this note up in verse 25, according to some copies. See how there's that E and it says according to some copies, and it gives you a number 217. So what they're ultimately saying, here it says 1017, and the text here it says 217 according to some copies. So what do you do with that? Well, you see that the translators are showing you that they put the majority or the favored text that agrees into the main body, and then outside of the body of text in the marginal note they're showing you how the minority of manuscripts read. This is very important because it shows you a textual decision was made. A judgment was made in order to bring forth a final conclusion. People take this decision making very lightly now in the textual criticism world. That's why there's so many Bibles today. But as you saw in that note, it says according to some copies. What I want to bring forth today is to show you the amount of pressure, strength, courage it took for these men to weigh all of this information in the balance. And in the dedication, the epistle dedicatory to King James, they even believed, and I'll turn there to show you, they even believed and state in the epistle dedicatory for when your highness had once out of deep judgment apprehended how convenient it was that out of the original sacred tongues, together with comparing of the labors, both in our own and other foreign languages, of many worthy men who went before us, watch carefully, there should be one more exact. Notice that ligature, the CT is connected. One more exact translation, capital T, of the Holy Scriptures into the English tongue. So they believed that they were translating an exact translation of the Holy Scriptures into the English tongue. That is a gigantic claim. They're saying, look, this is the exact Holy Scriptures from the original tongues into the English tongue. So they're saying that they did the exactly everything the way that God wanted them to. So with that, I want to show you what they had to work with here very briefly. But I just want to show you what they were analyzing so you can kind of put yourself into their shoes. I find that when you do that, you gain a reverence towards the Bible. So As you can see here, it says, according to some copies. Now, if you go over to Genesis chapter 1, get over there real quick if I can. You see here in this marginal note, I'm just using this as a reference point. It's a shorthand for Hebrew here. So they're showing you the literal and the interchangeable word in Hebrew ultimately having another rendering. And so what they're showing you is that this can read as this into English, because sometimes Hebrew was very broad in translation into English, which is very, very intricate. So ultimately, some of the Hebrew texts that they were analyzing, I have it here in my notes. This is not limited to or an exhaustive list. This is just to give you an idea. The Masoretic text tradition. So they had access to medieval manuscripts, not all of the manuscripts that we have extant today, that have been discovered later. They had access to Hebrew columns in a lot of the polyglots. So the polyglots were more or less a compilation of Bibles that had different columns of different translations. For instance, a Latin, Greek, Hebrew text side by side, kind of like a parallel Bible that you see today. They had Masoretic marginal traditions, so they had a lot of different traditional ways that they would look at things, like the Targums, certain things like that, and grammatical lexicon. So those are some of the things that the Hebrew, when they're referring to the Hebrew, they're analyzing all sorts of different documents. Now, when you look at the New Testament in Matthew chapter 13, this is the first time I think the word Greek appears. I'm not sure. I didn't look thoroughly, but it says here, the word in the Greek is a measure containing about a peck and a half, wanting little more than a pint. So they're saying that they're giving you the precise word of the measurement in the Greek here, because the translation into English would be measure. So they're defining it for you even more, ultimately showing you that the Greek texts that they analyzed were being very specific, so that the word that they wanted to use was a measure. Some of the Greek texts that they analyzed were Byzantine text, obviously the Textus Receptus, Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, the Septuagint, which was in the columns of the polyglots, portions of Origen's Hexapla, like I said, the polyglots there as well. Okay, so then we go over to the Apocrypha, and if we go over to 2nd Esdras, we see here a note. This one was challenging for me to find, but I found it. It's in 2nd Esdras 2:40, and you can see they consulted the Latin. Here it says, take thy number, O Zion, and shut up, or it says conclude would be an alternate rendering for shut up, which would be conclude. And some of the Latin texts that they would have had access to is Jerome's Latin Vulgate, the Old Latin, so this is pre-Jerome, the Roman Vulgate, translated by 16 in Clementine, Latin in the polyglots, so the columns of the polyglots, Erasmus of Beza, New Testaments. So those would be some of the ways that they would analyze the Latin through those different kinds of texts. Then if we jump back over, lastly, to Daniel chapter 2, where we see the Chaldee, which would be Aramaic, the interchangeable here. It says cut in pieces here. In Aramaic, you could see, or Chaldee, made pieces. So ultimately, if you're cutting in pieces, you're making pieces as well. But long story short, some of the Aramaic Chaldee things that they would have access to is the Masoretic text, where it shifts into Aramaic in the book of Daniel, in the Masoretic text. Rabbinic Bibles, the Aramaic Targums. Targums are just a paraphrase of the scriptures. Same thing with the polyglots in that shift. So what I wanted to pretty much go over with you is that you see that God allowed these men, there might be more, due to my only small amount of knowledge in diving into these references. There might be more languages cited, but those are the four main ones that I found. I wanted to show you this because there was a lot of consultation involved, a lot of men involved in the translation of the Bible. It wasn't like a one man's job, even though William Tyndale was a great contributor to the translation of the King James Bible. We see that God chose a multitude of counselors to come forth and bring forth an exact translation through a multitude of languages. Lastly, on that matter, some other languages that they consulted that I have in my notes, and is not limited to Aramaic, Syriac, Greek, Latin, Spanish, French, Italian, and Dutch. So you have to keep in mind that these men were analyzing things in a huge magnifying lens and bringing it in to an exactness, which I thank God for. So those are just some things I wanted to show you in the analyzing of the different languages and how complex it is. God bless you.